Hello, everybody. Welcome to the fourth bootcamp session. Hopefully, it's flying by for all of you. I know there's a lot of content in a short amount of time, but hopefully you're taking something out of it and just getting the experience that we hope to get. Hopefully the first milestone project that went well for you. We did the reviews over the weekend, and a lot of your sites looked really good. So good stuff with that. Let's keep it going. And yeah, today we're going to be talking about JavaScript and Node. Before we get started, does anybody have any questions about anything so far? Sweet. So today's agenda, there's a course credit form on Slack. So that's going to be it's just on Slack. Fill it out if you haven't already and you want the course credit. It's not mandatory. I think it's optional, but it counts for Tech Collective, I'm pretty sure, and it's going to be one of those 400. Tech Collective, so definitely make sure you read about that on Slack and fill out the course credit form if you're interested. And then today, we talked a little bit about this yesterday, but today we're going to go into more detail on combining JavaScript with HTML. And then after that, we're going to move into Node and NPM, and then we're going to go into milestone 2 and introduce that. So, yep, here we are today. Session 4, JavaScript and Node are the big ones. And we're almost halfway there, so good stuff, everybody getting this far. As usual, we're always going to get started with the Kahoot. It's going to be a review from last session. And yeah, just make sure to partner up with somebody if you can. If not, it's okay to work by yourself. Yeah.
I hate Zoom.
Now you have to.
What's wrong with this? This thing's in the way,
I think it's actually open.
Is it?
Yeah, I got you. This one. More.
They really want everyone to sign up for Kahoot. Oh wait, are you recording?
Yeah. Takes you a second to join it. I know every time I haven't been plugging my thing in recently, and it's been getting to like the 5%.
Oh really? It dies that fast.
It's really bad because Zoom's open, it's recording, it's screen sharing, and there's just content. And I don't know if having it plugged in adds anything, but it might.
Probably. Well, and just Chrome.
It really shouldn't die this way.
Yeah, mine does the same thing though. It won't last 2 minutes. Actually, maybe once.
I think it's like I think it's 18.
Yeah, it's 22 people.
I know like all the YouTube videos have been getting hella views, so I feel like people have been keeping up with the YouTube videos or like rewatching them. I don't know. I hope
I didn't actually realize that. I don't even know where the links. They're on the notion.
Yeah.
I'll have to go with them. Although I don't want to hear myself.
It is painful.
Yeah, no, it sucks.
I think it's probably
Might be. Okay, is there anyone waiting to get in still? Or is everyone in the game?
sweet.
Okay, so we're gonna go ahead and get started here with the game. Now that everybody's in. No, I haven't.
Why is it like even if good stuff?
Nice, perfect.
Wait, what's the sound option? Oh, all the way. All right.
Maybe.
All right.
Ethan's already losing. Oh, shit. Should we talk about it? Maybe.
So I didn't make this Kahoot. And if I'm looking at it, I feel like, doesn't there need to be a dollar sign in
Yeah.
front of the color?
There should be a dollar sign in front of the curly brace that's opening.
Um,
Otherwise, it's not going to recognize that as a variable.
so if you answered none of them, you would be correct. I think they're all incorrect. Sorry about that, everybody. Good luck though. Good job for the green players. Get some free points.
Oh, of course, Ethan.
That's Michelle, right?
Yeah.
So Michelle's just around.
Okay. So the reason that this value is truthy is because this is actually an array that we have declared here. Even though it's an empty array, it's still an object. So since it's an object and it exists, that's going to be truthy. And then this empty string is falsy, 0 is false, not a number is false.
Call me.
Oh, how do you get that?
Oh God. Oh God. I want to. How do I get out of this?
No.
This
There you
one.
go. There you go. Oh, and of course it's Ethan's.
Somebody's got to take out Ethan.
Okay, yeah, so we want to remember triple equals is what we're always going to be using when we're comparing. And Ethan is still on top.
So we might need to zoom in.
You're top today.
Perfect. That was what we needed.
Ethan has been knocked out. Explain that.
Yeah, if we can pull up the picture, show me. So this one was pretty tough, but we'll explain why it is. In this one, the 1 and 2 in the array is going to go there, and that array of 1 and 2 is going to be the first element. Then in the spread operator, it's going to be 1 and then 2, and then 1 and 2. So we have the array 1, 2, and then the next one is going to be the third index, and that's going to be the 1. So that was, I can re-explain that better if that was like hard to follow. But that was a pretty tricky one.
Keep going. All right, let's see the results. Ethan's coming back. Somehow.
Alright, 2 left. Let's see the results. Oh, why are they sending me this question?
Alright, let's see. Still somewhat close for first place.
The final one.
There's one more.
Ooh.
The gap is closing.
Wait. There's an easy way to find out.
Yeah, it's wrong.
This one's also wrong, right?
Yeah.
Or you're 100% sure it's wrong?
I'm like 9.
Okay, sorry, we stole these Kahoots from online sources without fully checking them. That's on us. I believe this one should be 1, 2, 3, 4. So if you got green, you lucked out. Let's see who ended up winning with our scuff Kahoot. Scuff. More hide these ones. Okay, so hopefully that Kahoot was fun. Sorry about it being having a few errors in it. Hopefully it was still informative though. And yeah, we should be good to start the content for today. And that's going to be combining JavaScript with HTML. So the first thing is that the DOM, and what that stands for is a document object model. You'll hear it frequently called the DOM. And what the DOM is it is a tree that represents the way your HTML looks. So I guess if you look at this image, you can see like everything starts with the window, and then in the document, then you have your actual HTML, and then in your HTML, you have your head and your body, and then it gets broken up further. The DOM is going to keep breaking up everything fully, and that's actually going to be how your code is stored. We will be doing some DOM manipulation today, and what that'll mean is we're going to actually be changing some of the elements, maybe some of the like text, maybe some styles. That's kind of up to us, and we have that freedom to do that. But the first thing is just kind of, understanding what the DOM is. And we also have to worry about connecting JavaScript into our HTML. There's a few different ways you can do that. You can have a script tag kind of at the top or bottom of your page. And you can put all your JavaScript inside of those script tags, similar to how you can do it with CSS. You can put style and put it in there, or you can add that script type equals text slash JavaScript, and then the file name as well. And that'll allow us to do like an external JavaScript file and read that within our HTML. And then, yeah, so one thing we can do with JavaScript is actually get HTML elements from the page. And this will allow us to do things like store elements as variables, maybe modify some elements and things like that. So to pick an element from the DOM, you can use some of the following functions. Document.get element by ID. What that will do is that will look through your HTML code, try to find something with that same ID, and that ID would be put inside of those parentheses. Similar, you can do get elements by class name, include a class name, and then you can do query selector all. And just a few notes, our document is a global variable. You don't need to import it, it's just there by default. And then another note is the query selector all function. That's going to use the same selector syntax as the CSS. So inside of those parentheses, you're going to want to put like .my class or hashtag my ID, or even the name of an attribute. And then another thing is we're going to go into a demo and all of this and see it in more detail, but this is just kind of like a brief overview of what it is to start. We have event listeners. And what these do is they allow you to run code on certain events. So something like a click, you're scrolling, a key press, maybe like mousing over something. Whenever you want, we can add these event listeners into our site, and they will allow us to kind of call functions or do certain things when one of those event listeners happens. So one way you can do this is by having kind of these two lines of code. And that's kind of a long-winded way to do that. We'll go into it in the next slide. There's an easier way to do it, but this kind of works. And you can add custom event listeners by doing it like this format. And so you'll kind of want to define a variable. Then you'll do the document, and then one of your selecting attributes. It doesn't have to be get element by ID, but in this case, that's what was used. And then we actually add a click event listener to it, and the function will actually pass an input called event into the event listener. And so the two-part most important events that get passed in are prevent default. And what that will do is that will allow you to like submit a form without your page refreshing. Usually when you submit a form, your page will refresh. And there's also event.target. And what that'll do is it'll allow you to do things like kind of just access your code or your HTML in different ways. And then we have the easier way to do event listeners. And you can actually put some directly into your HTML tags. So if you're familiar with event listeners, you can just put on click, and then you can call a function inside of some quotes. And that function is actually going to be one of those JavaScript functions that you can put in an external file or at the bottom. And there are quite a few event listeners. I attached a link, so if you're like looking at these slides later, you can see a list of all of the event listeners. It's like probably like 40 to 100 of them in that range. There's really quite a few. But some of the most popular ones include on mouse over. And what that does is if you like put your cursor over a div per se or any elements, you can trigger a function. Same with on blur. What that does is if you have an input and you like navigate away, a function can trigger. And then on load, and that will kind of do like once your page is finished loading, you can function a different, trigger another function. And we'll get into these in the demo. And then you can actually do some pretty cool stuff with the two things we just learned, using the DOM manipulation to actually find an attribute. And then using those event listeners, we can actually kind of make some changes. So I guess a good example of how we can do that here is in this first example. You can say something called a word box, and then you can get element by ID words. And then if you actually do the text context in the next page, that will get everything inside of your two HTML tags. There are quite a few. I don't know exactly what they're called, but there's a lot of things like text content. You can do inner HTML, you can do inner content, and they'll all do essentially the same thing. And that's going to be get the thing inside of your HTML tags. The next example is going to get all of the ingredients, or get the element which ID is ingredient, and then you're actually creating an element. And that is something, I guess, in that const potatoes is equal to document.create element. That is going to create one of those li tags or list element. It doesn't go into the HTML yet. You'll have to actually do that in the last line, which is that food list.append child potatoes. And that line right above that is actually setting the text of that new element we created to potatoes. And this will all be make a lot more sense once we actually get to the demo. But some other things you can do is you can change styles. So similar to like changing the content that goes inside of two tags, you can actually change the styles of any tags you want. So in this example, we're going to be changing the blue button, or whatever element has blue button as an ID. We're going to be adding, changing the color to black, and we're going to be making it 100 pixels wide. And you'll do that by having this like variable that gets created, and then by doing the dot style, you can access a bunch of different unique styles there. And again, this will all make much more sense once we do the demo. And then getting user input. So one thing that is going to be done in this next milestone is you guys will be required to use some input tags, which is an HTML tag we haven't seen before. And what these are like commonly used for are they're useful in forms, and they're a way you can get input from a user and then use that information in your code. There's a bunch of different types of them. There's dates, there's numbers, there's radio buttons, there's checkboxes. The most common one though is just a blank text field, and that's going to be called an input. There's also select, which is going to be an option, and like you know one of those drop downs. If you want to see all of the form different inputs you can do, I just recommend looking up like HTML form inputs, and you'll find quite a few. And then there's also text area, which is like a bigger version of input. And what that does is it allows you to like write as much kind of text as you want into a certain block. And again, we'll see some of these in the demo. And then you can actually change how your input tags look. But you can do that by just adding attributes such as date, number, checkbox. What that does is that'll like restrict the information that you can put into an input. So if you have an input which is a number, you're not going to be allowed to like type letters into it. You're only going to be able to put numbers. And that's just kind of one way you can keep your forms safe and validated, and make sure that the data gets inputted is like the appropriate data that you want. For pages that have lots of input, you can wrap them all in a form tag. You don't have to use a form tag, it's an option. To get the current value from an input tag, you just use the value attribute. So similar to, I guess we've seen inner HTML and text constants and stuff like that. We can use the value, and that will get whatever information is put inside of that input. And then it's generally a good practice to validate all of the user input. So you can do that with your own custom JavaScript logic, or there is also HTML validation that you can use. That includes the report validity function as well as a few others, but I'd suggest writing your own, as you can't really change the styles of the HTML validations. But that is an option, and it works great for like personal websites and smaller things like that that don't have like set style standards. And finally, we're going to be moving into the demo. And I know what we just talked over really quickly went by really fast. It was always going to have to go over pretty fast just because of these short boot camp sessions. but hopefully this demo will make a lot more sense and make what we just saw a lot more clear.
Any questions before we do jump into the demo?
And so what we're going to be doing in this demo is there's a pre-built website I made. Very, very simple, but we're going to be modifying that. And we're just going to be doing some nice things there. So if we look at the top, this is just a very basic header, doesn't do anything. We will change this color, the style of this, when this button is clicked in a bit. We will also use the on mouse over event listener. We'll add that to this. And that way, if the cursor is ever inside of this, we can change some content. And then you'll be doing something similar to this in milestone 2. And that's just going to be adding in ingredient into a list. So to get started, the first thing we need to do is actually include JavaScript into our code. So what we can do in this example is we can actually create a new JavaScript file. So we can do something called index.js. And we can actually put our JavaScript in here. We don't have any need for JavaScript at this moment, but we will in a second. So now we can go back into this and actually include, let me make sure it's actually readable. We can add that script tag. And what that'll do is allow us to use this new file we just created, similar to how you would import a style sheet. And then the source, and that's going to be that index.js. Close that, and we should be good to use the new JavaScript file we created in our site. So the first thing we're actually going to do is whenever this button is clicked right here, right now it doesn't do anything, but we'll change the style and maybe even change the text of what is shown on there. Let's make sure that's readable. And so the first thing we're going to do is we have this is the HTML that references this. And so this is what we're going to modify for this example. So the P is that blue text we saw, and that already has that ID. But if we want to, we can go ahead and add one of those event handlers we were talking about. And let's say, call it change color, because that's what we wanted to do. And then now in our JavaScript file, we can create a function called that change color. And we're going to do that arrow notation we learned about last week. And in here, we can actually go ahead and use some of those event handlers. So we can get the P element, get element by ID, and I believe it was called blue text. Yeah. So at this point, we have access to this P element, but we haven't done anything with it. So we'll actually go ahead and change the color. Dot color equals to green. And now if we actually go back to our code, make sure we save everything, we can see that now by clicking a button, we can actually change the styles on the screen. And that's pretty nice. Again, this website doesn't really have that like pretty of styles where changing it's worth it, but it is a good example. Similar, we can also change some of the contents of it. So we can actually do the inner.html, and that will, let's say, what should we change it to? New content. Go ahead and save that. Refresh this page, and now when we click the button, it'll do both. It'll change the style and it'll change the text. And then, any questions so far about any of this code? I know modifying your HTML with JavaScript can be kind of tricky. There's like it seems really wordy, and it is honestly, it's pretty annoying to do this. And we will, once we learn React, we'll find easier ways to do some of these things. But right now we don't have that in our toolkit. So this is the kind of best thing we can do for now. Are there any questions with this function? Sweet. So we should be good to move on to the next one. And that's what we're going to be doing. This one is changing just this text box, I guess, to div to, we're going to be changing the content when something is moused over it. So we can use another event listener called on mouse over. There's actually quite a few different event listeners, and these are some of the ones that I was talking about. They can all be on the site, and they all do slightly different things, but we can say something like add or change text. And we are also going to add one which happens whenever the mouse leaves the div, and we'll say reset text. So we have these two access to these new functions in JavaScript. These two functions aren't created yet. So right now, if we were to do this, either nothing will happen, or we might actually get some errors in the console because it might be looking for these functions and it doesn't see them. But we can actually go ahead and go into the back to our code. And what do we call these? Change text and reset text. So let change text equal the arrow function. And we can say let div equal document.getElementID. Similar to the ones we have been doing so far, get element by ID. And I believe it was called mouse location. Okay. And then, so now we should have access to that div. And now we can actually just go ahead and change the inner HTML to maybe something like cursor in the box. Spelled weird. And now we can actually go back, and we should, now whenever we put our mouse inside of it the first time, it will change. We haven't done anything to change it once it leaves. So we'll actually go ahead and add that now, but we can see that our function has been added and it has worked so far. This next function is going to be very similar to the same one. So we can just go ahead and copy and paste it, change it to that reset text. It uses the same ID, so we won't need to change that because it's on the same element. And we can go ahead and go to what it was when it started. So cursor is not in the box. So whatever. Let me change the cursor is not inside this div. So now we can go and see what happens whenever we put our cursor inside this box. It changes, the text changes. Once we leave cursor, it'll change back to what it was. You can keep doing this, and that's kind of the on mouse over event listener. It's not something that is used in this milestone, but it is something that could be used in some of your projects. So I thought it'd be good to go over as well. Any questions with this on mouse over event listener before I move on to adding an ingredient into a list? Sweet. So now we can go back into our HTML and we can already see some things that we added. We added that input tag, and what that input does is that looks like this. It allows you to input text on a screen. And what we're going to want it to end up doing is allowing users to add new ingredients to the list. We don't have that functionality yet, but this text input is something that we can just go ahead and add with no functionality. So this won't do anything, but we can go back into our HTML and add some JavaScript to it. And we should be good to see that change and get added to the list. So the first thing is we'll add that on click event listener we used in the first example, and we'll create a new function. So on click is equal to maybe something like add ingredient. And then in our index.js, we can create a new function. Let add ingredient equal this. And we have our function created. First things we have to do is we have to access the UL or the unordered list. And we'll do that by accessing the ID of ingredients. So we can do let UL is equal to document.getElement by ID. And we can actually, what was it? It was ingredients. So now we have access to the HTML content of the unordered list. Next thing we can do is we're going to want to create this new element that's going to be added into the list, and that'll be li. So let li is equal to document And these names actually don't have to be descriptive of the tag. They are. I find it useful to name it, but it could be literally anything. It just makes more sense for me to call it what it is, but it's completely arbitrary, so that doesn't matter. We can call it random right now. Then ingredient, we have to actually get what is inside this. And so we'll go ahead and do that now with our next line of code. Let ingredient is equal to document dot get element by ID. It was given had the ID of new ingredient. So, and then we have to do the dot value to actually get what is inside of that. Why did that just change? Who knows? So now nothing is going to happen still. There's a few more lines we'll have to add. And that's going to actually, these next two lines will be the creating of the new element. I believe I called it random actually. Dot append child, and then document dot create text node. And then that's going to be the ingredient, this variable. And what this code is doing is it's basically creating the inner text. It's basically setting the inner text of ingredient to whatever the value is here. So I guess we could go ahead and console.log this to, I guess, this, and this value that gets logged is going to be the input of the final text we'll add, but we can go ahead and see what that'll look like in the console first. So let's say we just wanted an ingredient called this. We can see it gets created there. Still not on the screen yet, so there's one final step we'll have to do, but we're almost there. Now we can actually go ahead and do ul.append child, and then we called it random. So this is it. This is going to do exactly what we want. Let's refresh everything and we'll start from the scratch. So again, you hit this button, it'll change the content and change the styles. We went over that. Then we went over the mouse over event handler. And we can see that we can again change content, and same with it when it leaves. And then finally, this last one is you can actually use an input to update your screen. So let's say what goes well with tomatoes, mushrooms, and soup. Pasta. You can go. Oh, I broke it. Anybody see my bug?
That was an idea. The top of the ingredients, I think.
This one?
Yeah.
Good catch. So now it'll add to the list. That's one good catch is you want to actually name your ID stuff that's going to be relevant and helpful. So I guess ingredients was actually a pretty good name. I just must have mistyped or forgot. But any questions about any of what we went over with event listeners or DOM manipulation? Again, that was pretty quick. I know it feels rushed, but by getting the hands-on experience during the project, hopefully it'll start to make a little bit more sense than it does so far. Sweet. We should be good to move on then. I'll make sure to upload this code into the lecture resources or bootcamp resources. So those will be in Notion for all of your guys' convenience. And sweet.
Cool. So now we're going to be talking about Node and NPM and teaching your terminal to cow speak. So up until now, we've only been using JavaScript in the browser, and that has either occurred through like a web page or through the console. But what Node has kind of allowed JavaScript developers to do is write JavaScript code that could be directly run on your computer. So that has like completely changed web development, because now that means not only does your front end use JavaScript, you can also write backend code in JavaScript. And I'm not sure if we've already went over this, but front end stuff is like HTML and CSS. It's how you display data. Backend stuff is more like databases and how you're actually storing data. So before, those two used to be like completely separate programming languages, but now everything can be written in JavaScript. And this will allow us to, Node will also give us access to NPM, which I'll talk over in the next slide, and then it'll eventually allow us to connect to MongoDB, which is our database. So NPM stands for Node Package Manager. When you download Node.js, you also get NPM, but for the most part, like you don't really use them together. Like they're completely separate when you're actually using your command line. So what a package manager allows you to do is it allows you to take open source code that people just put on the internet for free and implement it directly in your own program. So things that have already been written, you don't have to write again. Essentially, this prevents you from not reinventing the wheel that's already been made. And the size of a node package can vary drastically from like an entire web framework to like a single function. So we're going to go over some examples of packages next. So we've been talking a lot about, at the very beginning, we mentioned the MERN stack. Node is kind of what allows us to get access to the MERN stack. So MERN stands for MongoDB, Express, React, and Node. So Node, we already mentioned. React, which is kind of like this cool front-end tool we're going to be learning next, is also a Node package. Express, which is allows us to connect to MongoDB, is another Node package. And then a couple more examples. Lodash is, I've never used it personally, but it's apparently the most popular package on NPM. ESLint and Prettier, I highly recommend downloading one of these. They're linters, which essentially kind of will automatically format your code and allow you to write much cleaner code. There's also a feature on VS Code called format on save. Highly recommend turning that on. It makes your code look a lot better. Jest, which is a testing library used for JavaScript. Moment, which is a node package that kind of allows you to work with dates a lot easier because dates are kind of a pain to work with in JavaScript. Then there's Chalk, which is the second most popular node package. This allows you to kind of like style your terminal. So you can write like green text or red text into your terminal and make stuff bold and stuff. And finally, there's also lots of garbage on NPM, like is_odd, which is a node package that tells you if a number is odd. Please don't use it. So in order to use NPM, just go like Google Node on your computer and you can download it directly off of Node.js. It's a pretty small install. I don't think it should take too long, but I could be wrong. And then if you do already have Node installed, you can run inside of your project repository, you can run npm init -y. The -y just kind of removes all of like the prompts that you normally receive when you initialize an npm repository. And then for this demo, we're going to be using the node package called Cause. So in order to download any npm package, the command is npm install and then whatever the name of the package is. I'll give you a second. I'm not sure how long Node will take to download.
I think it takes a bit.
It takes a bit. Okay, yeah, we'll just go straight into the next slide then. So once you do install Node and run npm init, you'll get two files and the folder that get added to your repository. The first one is package.json, which is kind of like a grocery list of all the packages you've installed. So if I ran npm install Cause, now Cause is going to be on my package.json. And that allows you to easily see all the packages you currently use in the project. And then there's package-lock.json. This is the list of all of your dependencies and your like dependencies, if that makes any sense. So if React was dependent on Cause, then both React and Cause would end up in that one. That one you don't have to look at super often. It just kind of exists specifically for Node. And then known modules. This is going to be the folder where all of your packages are actually going to get installed. So I already talked a little bit about this. So this is all done in the command line. There's not, as far as I'm aware, there's not like a great GUI to use it. So it's pretty easy to use on the command line. So the most common commands are npm install package name. That's how you download a new package. There's npm install, which kind of goes through your current package.json and makes sure that you have everything that you're supposed to have for your repository. That third one should be npm uninstall package name, and that removes a package. And then just a couple tips when using npm. The node modules folder gets very big very quickly. So the best practice is you don't push that code to GitHub. That stays on your local machine and you only push the package.json, which is like your grocery list. So everyone knows what packages are being used, but like all that junk code that you downloaded from the packages, that only stays on your local machine. And then when working with teams, if like someone else installs a node package, just make sure that you also install that node package, because otherwise whatever code's using that package just isn't going to work because you don't have it installed. And then if you're lazy like me, you can use npm5 instead of npm install for like either installing a package or just for the npm install command. Okay, now a quick demo.
Can I do it on your computer?
Yeah. Should I hop on the Zoom call? Or
Yeah, that'd be good.
where's the Zoom?
I'll send it to you in the Slack. Make you screen share too.
Yeah.
And do you have any questions about the node stuff that we just talked about?
It makes a lot more sense once you actually start using it. Are you slacking it?
Yeah. You should be able to screen share too.
Is it? Okay, so if you do happen to already have Node installed, this is how you would use a package. So I'm currently going to be in this folder called npm demo.
Can you
But-
zoom in once?
Yeah. Let me know. Is that good?
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. Oh. So the first thing we're going to do is just make a new file. We're going to call this cowsay.javascript. And then we're actually going to get node npm in this directory. So normally you just install it in the root. I'm putting in a folder because there's a lot of stuff I have on my computer right now. So npm init-y.
I'll also say that that command line you're seeing is built into VS Code.
Yes, you
Um,
can use any command.
You don't
line.
have to use the VS Code one, but it
Yeah.
does make things easier, and you can open it, I think, with Control tilde.
So now if you look over here, there's this new JSON file called package.json. And this is where like, I'm gonna shrink this terminal down slightly. So this is where your kind of grocery list of packages will go. So now if I install cowsay, also just to warn you, npm, as you add more packages, it kind of yells at you a bit. You'll get lots of warnings. Sometimes they're important. Most of the time, it's just a bunch of junk. So don't worry if you get like 50 lines of text just kind of spat at you when you install a package. But now if you look here, cowsay is inside of our package.json, and we also got a package block.json, which has like ANSI styles must be cowsay must be dependent on ANSI styles because that also got installed. And then in node modules, here's like all the actual packages that got installed. As you can see, this gets very big very quickly. So this is why we don't put it on GitHub. So in order to use an npm package, a lot of packages, since we are web developers, people can actually write like good documentation. So if you just Google the node package, NPM has a pretty nice website. And then in order to get to the documentation, usually there's documentation right on NPM, or you can go to either the GitHub repository or the website, and those will usually offer even more resources. So here's kind of like the documentation for how to use Calce. I'm just gonna copy this example and put it directly in calce.js. Also, just to let you know, sometimes you have to use this kind of older syntax for imports. This is kind of like how Node recognizes imports. So if the regular like import syntax doesn't work, try this one with the require, and hopefully it works then. And then this is just like a JavaScript file. So normally, if we were using the browser, we wouldn't really be able to. Normally, we wouldn't be able to run it without using the browser. But since I have Node installed, I can just call node calce.js. And now we had a cow saying stuff in the terminal. So that's a big step in technology. But yeah, that's just a little demo of what node packages can do. If you have any questions, let us know. But that is all the content for that.
I think it's pretty self-explanatory. That's not the most practical example,
Yeah.
but it is a fun example.
Yeah.
It's pretty easy to use. So if you want to like, it's a great first node package to use. But there are a lot of like, as we saw earlier, the ones that were used a lot more commonly. So React is actually a node package, and when you install React, you'll use Node to do so. And yeah, there's just a lot of actual like really useful packages that you can just use at your own will. You don't have to like pay for them, or you don't have to do anything. They just have access to them.
Yeah, it's all free. And there are definitely much more important packages out there like React and Express.
All right, so we don't have any questions about the demo. All right, so just final thing for today. Just gonna run through this pretty quick. So we'll introduce milestone 2. Hopefully most of you have turned in milestone 1 by now, or you're pretty far on that milestone. If you are stuck, be sure to like stick around, ask us questions, or reach out to us on Slack if you need anything. So for the second milestone, I'll kind of go ahead and demo what the website's gonna look like differently. So we're going to be using the stuff we've learned in the last 2 sessions, putting some JavaScript in your websites and making stuff more interesting. So your main page is going to be mostly the same. If we move on over into a recipe page, this will be where we add most of our functionality. So the first thing we're going to do is similar to what Cole demoed earlier, just have a form that lets you to add any ingredient. So just we can add whatever we want, press the button, and it'll throw it onto the ingredient list. And then same thing with the instructions page here. So you can add in the instructions with a larger text box, and it'll add it onto the next step. The other main thing we're going to be doing is kind of converting your recipe page into JSON format. So we talked a little bit about that, kind of the difference between JavaScript objects and JSON. This is going to be really important kind of when we want to move into databases and be working with some more advanced front-end tools as well. So right now, we're kind of just setting up that step, so we have a little bit of stuff to work with. But if you click this button here, it'll just kind of take this recipe page and take basically every element on the page and convert it into a big JSON file that you'll be able to turn around and spit back into the database or wherever else you want to use it. So you have what this page looks like in a more compact format. And there's more info about all this stuff on the Notion. I won't go through all that right now because we're running a little short on time. But and then this milestone will be due, I think this Friday.
It should be this Friday. Yeah, it is should be a little bit quicker of a milestone than the last one, so that we don't feel bad about like having it due in a few days. If you have questions, reach out for sure.
And then just a couple general updates. Yeah, so projects due. And then be sure to fill out that course credit form on Slack if you're interested in that. It's a really good opportunity. And then that's all we have for y'all today, unless you have any questions for us.
I'll add one thing about the project milestone. I know in the Notion pages, it's like assuming you used a data like ingredients and instructions in a format that's similar to mine. If you didn't do it like that, feel free to be like flexible and just make sure that all of the data that's like important to your actual recipes gets put into that JSON format, because it will be used in a later milestone. We might not like see why just getting all of your recipe info and putting it onto the screen is helpful, but that we're going to use it in later milestones. So if it doesn't seem immediately useful, it will be useful down the road.
Should be it. Thanks for sticking around.
Stop that.